The Kid and the Camera is an adorable little stop-motion film by Braden Ortiz. It is, in fact, about a kid and his camera, and I'm about to describe it to you. This young boy, Kalen, received a brand new camera on his 6th birthday, and afterwards the world began to shine brighter than ever as he saw it through the eye of his camera lens. He took countless photos and probably some really stellar TikToks. But Kalen took a bad fall one day, and his camera broke. It was still able to take pictures, but a horrible crack would scar each and every one of them. The night after this unfortunate incident, Kalen was lying in bed thinking about the state of his camera when he heard a knock at his window, and lo and behold, standing there was a strange winged creature that called itself the Kipsneed, Kalen's own personal sleep fairy. Kalen, being a very bright young boy, was a little skeptical of this creature and knew that he was not supposed to talk to strangers, but to his surprise and awe, this creature was no stranger at all, for it seemed to know quite a bit about him. It even knew his name. Now comforted by its presence, Kalen explained the cause of his woe, his broken camera. But the Kipsneed revealed that this was something it could help with, and his camera would be fixed in no time, as long as Kalen were to follow the Kipsneed into the night. And so, rejuvenated and full of hope, Kalen did just that, until he came across a large, unfamiliar house. Slightly nervous now, he decided to still venture inside. He needed to venture inside. He needed to fix his camera. This is what happened next.
Some weeks later, authorities discovered the basement. The rest of the boy was never found.
The Kid and the Camera is a horrifying stop-motion film by Braden Ortiz. It is, in fact, about a kid and his camera, but it is also about so much more. It's about the fanciful and imaginative ways children can see the world around them, and how this imagination can also be incredibly dangerous. The antagonist of this short film, the Kipsneed, is a strange one. It's never quite revealed whether he was a regular man this whole time, or if he was originally wearing a costume and later changed out of it to convince Kalen that it was trustworthy a little easier, but in any case, the way Kalen saw him was entirely fabricated, the product of the wishful thinking of a young boy held captive by the wonder of his world. The really intelligent thing that this film does is show us two different perspectives. First, as I already mentioned, we have Kalen's perspective, represented by stop-motion claymation visuals. This showcases the false reality he perceives and how his childlike wonder distracts him from the true nature of his terrifying enemy. But the second perspective showcased in this film is the perspective of the camera. The camera is an unbiased, unfiltered, completely realistic view of reality. As is established at the start of the film with the first photos Kalen takes with it, it will always show us the truth. The truth that Kalen never saw, that the Kipsneed was not a magical creature at all, but a terrifying killer that sought to do him harm. Kalen was right about one thing though, he never saw the Kipsneed as a human figure, and in a sense that was true. I would never call this monster a human either. What makes films like this fascinating is how unpleasant they are. I do not enjoy watching films like The Kid and the Camera. I actively dread them. Yet I think stories like this in the horror genre are undeniably important, and the purpose of this video is to explain why. Horror can make you squirm, and it can make you want to turn off your television, but there should be a good reason for that. There's often a good reason why storytellers desire to make us uncomfortable and scare us, and today I want to explain why, so if you're at all skeptical about the value that this genre can have, I encourage you to stick around a little longer. That being said, this video will continue to cover some rather disturbing topics, all of which I've listed here along with the stories that utilize them, respectively. Feel free to pause and read through them all so you know what you're in for. I think there is a valid and important reason why all this is shown in these works of art, but if you're particularly sensitive to any of these topics, I encourage you to skip the relevant parts of the video at your own discretion, or the whole video if you feel like this is one you should sit out on for now. For the rest of you, I hope you enjoy the video. Every good story needs to have conflict. Without conflict, there's no tension within a story. There's no desire to see what happens next, and there's nothing to really drive the narrative forward. I think that everyone kind of inherently accepts this and understands that that's the case. If you think about it though, it's kind of weird that we really only enjoy a story if it involves the characters being inconvenienced or harmed in some way, but because that's the only way a story can properly progress, it really engages the audience. We like to see characters face problems to see how or if they will overcome them, and to learn about them and about ourselves. But when a story uses its source of conflict to really honestly show the darker parts of life and human nature, we immediately become much more uncomfortable with that story and much more likely to reject it entirely. We don't like the unpleasantness that stories like The Kid and the Camera provide. While horror is a genre that is appreciated by many people, there's an equally large group of people that refuse to touch it either because they see it as crude, unsophisticated, cruel, or dangerous. At the same time, many people do like horror, but they only like it for the sudden scares and the temporary thrill that it can provide. Because of the polarizing nature of horror, it can be pretty difficult to convince your average Joe that the genre has genuine value beyond that of some cheap Wednesday night spook fest like, I don't know, Night of the Living Artichokes or something. That's not a real thing, right? Okay, I just checked. When I googled Night of the Living Artichokes, I did get this wonderful little YouTube video, and it's super short, so let me just share it with you. I think it's really marvelous. Terrifying. I'm very glad I got to experience that today. I think that when you take a bit of time to really examine horror, then the value it has becomes pretty glaringly obvious. And before we move on to some more examples to demonstrate that, let's look at The Kid and the Camera one more time. We already talked about how one of the most interesting things that it does is play with perspective. This idea ties into the more broad theme that the film is trying to portray. That children are naive and very innocent, and while that's a perfectly normal thing, it also means that they're in an extra level of danger compared to everyone else, because they don't understand that there are people out there who would harm them. They don't have the experience necessary yet to determine what is a threat and what's just a weird butterfly guy who's like stoned out of his mind. I think this film could be super effective in keeping children safe, and it serves as a good reminder of what happens when we don't do that. Lastly, this film is just really cool from an art perspective in the way that it blends a style reminiscent of claymation with live action, with analog horror aesthetics, with the vibe of a wholesome children's cartoon. There's a lot here. That's such a unique mesh of ideas that I think is worth appreciating, even ignoring the other fantastic elements of the film as well. Now, sometimes horror is just meant to scare you, and I think that's perfectly fine. No other genre can evoke such a visceral emotional reaction out of a person. Effective horror can leave you frightened for a surprisingly long time, and it's just plain enthralling to accept the challenge that good horror presents. Are you brave enough to experience the whole thing? Sometimes that's all you really need, and a story doesn't require any type of deeper message. For example, I've been playing a lot of VR horror recently with titles like Cosmodread from White Door Games. That game, it doesn't seem to have many deeper meanings or messages to convey, it's just plain scary and has turned countless pairs of pants brown around the world. It's a game about escaping an abandoned spaceship filled with terrifying aliens, and I don't mean, oh wow, look at the cute little gray abomination, isn't he so weird and fun and spooky? When I say aliens, I mean, oh no, somebody please call the military because I cannot do this on my own! It's a fun game that I can use to see how fearless I would really be in such a harrowing situation. The answer is not very, and slowly build my skill with each run as the layout of the spaceship is slightly different each time. That's all the game needs to be. And ultimately, it's a game I can also walk away from very easily. What makes some horror, like the 1984 British-Australian film Threads, very insidious is how they play on fears that are very real and very present in the modern world, meaning that once you watch such movies, you can never truly walk away from them. Now, Threads in particular was probably the one piece of media that I was least excited to talk about during this video, not because it's bad, but because it's bad. It's one of the most disturbing films I've ever seen, and I hated the idea that to make this video, I would have to 1. Rewatch the film so I would know what parts to talk about and so it would be fresh in my mind, 2. Edit the film into the video and thus have to look at all that footage again, and 3. Subject you all to the exact same torture that I've had to go through by watching this film. I think you'll all inevitably come to hate me for what I've done to you by revealing to you that this is a film that exists. Because beforehand, you probably just thought Threads was that new Twitter thing by Instagram, but now you know that there's an entirely different thing called Threads, and it's just, like, somehow worse. If it sounds like going through this movie was torture for me, it's because it was. So if you want a way to support me in these efforts, you can go to the link on screen right now, and there's a way to do just that and support my future videos. Thank you. The reason Threads is so terrifying isn't because it's about a monster or anything supernatural, it's just about people. Specifically, about nuclear war. It's a very methodical approach to showing how average everyday life can be slowly overcome with the chilling premonition that something terrible is about to happen, and by the time it suddenly does, 1 hour in when the bombs drop, it's pure horror from that moment onward, and that's not a description I use lightly. This film uses what almost feels like a methodical step-by-step process to show not just the obvious things that can come from society crumbling, but even the little things you would never think of. It takes the time to show how even the most mundane, average members of a society can be twisted by their cruel world to do awful things that only add to the tragedy of their situation. It's very easy to say war bad or nukes bad, but films like Threads are way more effective in sending that message, and that's why their particular brand of horror is necessary. It's not horror in the traditional sense, but it has many of the same stigmas attached to it, being shunned by mainstream audiences because of the graphic depictions of, anything and everything that it shows. This film is one that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, but that's also the exact reason why I'm glad it exists. It has a clear message it's trying to convey, and while it's certainly not subtle, I don't think it needs to be. I think it's good that this message is conveyed in such a crystal clear way. Art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable, and I think that statement describes what makes stories like Threads so crucial. They have something to say, and they don't shy away from showing the raw, unfiltered consequences of not heeding their warnings. That's not to say that all horror is so profound. A lot of it is very, very stupid, but I think it's worth sifting through the garbage to find those little nuggets of gold that lie underneath, as long as you have the stomach to handle them. If Threads in particular sounds interesting to you, you can watch the full movie on Amazon Prime and... Wait, the movie is unavailable to watch in my location? Well, how can I watch movies like Threads if they're not available in my country? Actually, as it turns out, the answer is easy. You need today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. Did you know that it's super easy for websites to see your location and other data online? The best way to avoid that and to access region-locked content like movies and TV shows from other countries that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise is Atlas VPN. It's the best VPN deal on the market. With their summer deal, Atlas VPN is just $183 a month, with 3 months extra, and that's with a 30-day money-back guarantee. That is a ridiculously low price that you can take by using the link in the video description below. Be quick because it's a limited time offer. Some of the many other really cool features that Atlas offers is blocking malware and ads and notifying you of the best deals when you're shopping online. There's so much useful stuff here, genuinely. Once it's installed, you can start using it in seconds. Look, it is literally that easy. Again, the summer deal is on right now for just $183 per month with 3 months extra. And that's all with the link in the video description below. Again, this is a limited time offer, so hurry. And of course, thank you to Atlas VPN for sponsoring today's video. With the recent popularity of films like Hereditary that approach horror from a new human perspective, the genre as a whole has started to pivot to a much more psychological focus, and older works that have an element of this are finding newfound popularity. Horror that focuses on the human condition or on the ways our own minds can harm us are starting to really flourish. Sometimes this theme is obvious, but other times it's hidden under the surface of what appears at first glance to be a more standard spooky story. Take The Enigma of Amigara Fault, for example. It's written by Junji Ito, one of the most prolific authors in the horror scene, so it's certainly a well-known story, yet it's also a very short one, clocking in at just 33 pages. In that short amount of time, though, it's managed to stick with me a lot more than most horror films have. The story is about a recent earthquake in Japan that led to a fault in the land, and on the side of it, countless human-shaped holes are revealed. It's unclear how long they've been there. But when this strange discovery is televised all around the world, many people start to feel inexplicably drawn to the place to see it for themselves. It only takes a small amount of time before the realization comes to the public that each of these holes is specifically shaped around a particular person. So it doesn't take long at all for people to start crawling inside their respective holes, but once they enter, it's nearly impossible for them to get back out, and they essentially disappear within the depths of their hole, never to be seen again. Several months later, a second fault is discovered on the opposite side of the mountain with an entirely new set of holes, only these don't have a human shape like the others. Yet it slowly dawns on the reader as they read these last few pages that these are, in fact, the same holes as before, and the people who entered from the other side have slowly been funneled through their holes like going through a long twisted straw, their own bodies being contorted. And now, as the other side of the mountain is discovered, the people trapped within these holes are about to be set free from their prison, though they will never be the same. On the surface, this story is really disturbing, but it's also a very fascinating look at how our minds can work against us. The holes in Amigara Fault ensnare people like a lethally addictive drug, and honestly, that's what this story feels like to me. Obviously, I won't say that this was Junji Ito's intent, but when I read this story, the moment that the characters come across this fault for the first time, it feels like the start of a horrific addiction to me that, while initially alluring, will eventually lead a person into their own demise and transforming them methodically into something that they will never really escape from. Something completely unrecognizable. Again, I doubt that that's what Junji Ito intended for this story. Usually he seems to just take something and make it scary, and that's kind of his creative process. I don't think he puts that level of thought into it all the time. That's not a diss to him. It's just me saying that I don't think he thinks about the subtext too much because that's not his brand of horror, and that's fine. And you can see this, for example, in some of his other wonderful stories like Glyceride, where the main antagonist is grease and pimples, or his other story, A Shit to Remember, which is exactly what it sounds like. But my point is that knowing how he writes these stories, I doubt he intended for the enigma of Amigara Fault to say anything deep about human psychology, morbid curiosity and its potential consequences, or the concept of a person going through so much hardship that they become unrecognizable even to themselves. Even so, the fact that I was able to pull such meaning from his story regardless speaks to the quality that horror can have. Even when it's just trying to scare me, I can still come out of the experience with more than just freshly brown pants. I can come out of it with fresh ideas that broaden my perspective on any particular topic I connect it with. Junji Ito's stories don't always do that, as we mentioned before, but with how many different subgenres of horror that he's explored over his decades-long career, he's ended up touching on a lot of interesting subjects, and is the only artist I know of who can make the pattern of a spiral viscerally terrifying. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, do yourself a favor and read his long-form work, Uzumaki. There's one other work that he was involved in that I know for a fact did mean to delve more into psychological horror, but unlike most of his other work, it's not a manga. And that's not the strangest thing about it. The strangest thing about this project is that it was never even fully finished, yet it left a bigger footprint on the games industry than most other horror games could ever dream to. The project that I'm talking about is PT. When PT was first released to the public several years ago, it made a big impact, and it was talked about a lot. It received critical acclaim, but these days, that discourse has kind of quieted down, even with the potent effect that this game has had on the horror landscape as a whole. The letters in PT stood for Playable Teaser, and that's exactly what it was. PT was a teaser for the next game in the Silent Hill franchise. But the game would never come out because the team fell apart for various reasons that I won't get into here. Anyway, after that, Silent Hill kind of vanished, and a new game for the series hasn't come out in over a decade, so really one of the last things Silent Hill left behind was PT. The last remnant of a series that would go on a big hiatus. It's a reminder of the game we could have gotten but never did. And that's haunting, because this teaser is all that's left. It's made by game developer Hideo Kojima in collaboration with the filmmaker Guillermo del Toro, I think that's how you say his name, and also, as I mentioned, Junji Ito was purportedly involved as well. So why is this game stuck with so many people considering that it can be completed in just 30 minutes? Well, the best way to answer that is probably just to tell you. The game begins with the player waking up in a dark, dingy room. All that beckons to them is a single illuminated door, and inside is the hallway of a home. It seems relatively normal at first, albeit somewhat clustered, but as the player explores this narrow hallway, a few things will stick out to them. First, the clock is set at just 1 minute to midnight, but no matter how long the player stares at it, it never quite turns over to 12 AM. But that could just be a game development oversight. It isn't necessarily anything to worry about, right? But then there's the bathroom, which is locked shut and completely inaccessible. Fair enough, maybe the developers just haven't made that part of the house available to us for whatever reason, and if that's the case, then there's nothing to really worry about, except for the radio, which faintly comes into earshot as the player draws nearer and starts to play a news report of a man killing his family, and relates it to similar reports happening across the country. It seems like familial tensions are building up nationwide. It sure is good that such a horrible murder didn't happen in this house, though. Right? Eventually the player will reach the end of this hall and open the door to see what lies beyond it, only to be met with the same hall again, and it quickly becomes clear that something is very, very wrong with this house. The chandelier is swinging, the radio is off, and there is knocking at the bathroom door. A baby can be heard crying inside, but it is impossible to reach it. This infinite loop of the same hallway over and over again continues as the player slowly feels their character descend into madness until they reach the end of the hallway once again and watch in horror as the door slams shut right in front of them. But the bathroom door unlatches. By now, roaches have begun crawling across the floor near that door, drawn to some unseen rot, and as the player peers into the room, they catch a glimpse of this.
Oh, wow, it's a good thing that disappears right away and we never have to see that abomination ever again. But at least the bathroom's open all the way now and we can finally get to see what's inside. This Jello baby abomination thing, and if I had a nickel for every time I said the words Jello baby on this channel, I'd have 2 nickels, which is not a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice.
From this point onward, the game begins to break. Glitches flash across the screen as cryptic text can be seen too briefly to decipher it. Windows break, and photos are now torn upon re-entering the infinite hallway. The world of the game is coming apart, and it's horrific. Glimpses of the crimes that have happened in this home pop in and out of existence, like a refrigerator tied shut and hanging from the ceiling, or disturbing sounds coming from a hole in the bathroom wall. The radio continues to drone on about the shaky nature of modern society and the epidemic of broken homes across the nation. Wow, this is just all getting worse. The game continues doing whatever it is that it's been doing until this happens, and the game restarts. Not only is this house a big loop, but the game itself is looping as it slowly erodes. The player can really feel their character's madness, and it's done incredibly well over the course of this half hour. Eventually, the game confirms that the player is being haunted by the dead family described earlier, and the true nature of the game as a Silent Hill teaser is revealed. I always find stories that take place entirely in one setting really fascinating. Take films like 12 Angry Men or Mass, for instance, which essentially only use one room for most of their respective runtimes, yet are both far more fascinating than most major blockbusters, in my opinion. In a non-horror setting, these stories can be really difficult to get right because it requires the storyteller to have the focal point on their characters for basically the whole story, and the characters have to be really strong to support that. But when you have a horror story that tries to do this, I find that it's way easier to pull off correctly, and it's much simpler to get a good outcome out of it. Games like PT, or to a lesser extent Five Nights at Freddy's, by utilizing just one location, make the player keenly aware of the fact that they have nowhere else to go. In a more open horror setting, there's at least the option to run from whatever threat might manifest itself, but in a game as restrictive as PT, that's not nearly as possible. I think that's what makes the game significantly better. On the other hand, with the setting the player is in constantly changing in small ways, it always feels fresh and you never quite know what will have changed each time you open that door. The game almost feels like a hybrid of using the same location while also using multiple in a way. That's one of the reasons PT has really stuck out in the horror community, but there's always been something else too. Maybe it has something to do with the very real and grounded source of the game's central threat. While you could technically say that the main threat are the ghosts, and you'd be correct, PT is very explicit about the fact that the real root of the issue and the cause of this father's crimes have to do with the increasing societal instability, especially surrounding the family. The focus is on fathers who feel driven to the brink of madness and because of it, become terrible people and do terrible things. It's a really potent idea considering the parallels it has to real modern society, where a lot of people feel lost right now, especially driving towards the male self-improvement space, which has simultaneously glorified disturbing people like Andrew Tate, yet has also genuinely led to many people improving their lives and being better for it, getting out of the kinds of messes that we see in this game. The game doesn't show that side of things, but it certainly shows the darker aspects of society where men are looking for purpose, do not find it, and then become monsters to those they are supposed to protect. This makes it not only terrifying, but tragic when you realize that throughout a large encounter of the game, the main ghost Lisa is constantly behind you, the player, unable to forget what she went through at the hands of her own husband. It's tragic, and it makes you realize that she's not the villain here, and she's trapped here, like you, waiting for an escape.
That got a little bit intense for a second, Ed. I'm sorry, I feel like after this video we all need to just go outside and take a breather, and we will in a second. But first, I want to talk about one more piece of media that's gained a cult following over the past few years, but that I still feel is very underrated. It's been 15 years since its release, and I don't mean that it's underrated in the sense of, oh, this film was seen by 14 billion people, but it should have been seen by 60 billion. No, I mean, I feel like this is genuinely a film that should be talked about along with the great horror staples that everyone knows. It's probably too niche to ever break that barrier, but I think that's what it deserves. And I'm not entirely sure if it's niche accidentally or by design. See, the director of this film has essentially vanished ever since its release, and the few times that we have heard him speak, he's talked about how he wants this film to be the type of thing that you just come across one day and you have no idea where it came from. That sort of mysterious underground vibe seems to be what he's going for with this movie, and if it is, I think he's succeeded. His film's name is Lake Mungo. Okay, I know that name sounds really silly, but I promise this film is genuinely terrifying. Just stick with me.
Lake Mungo is an Australian horror film that follows the Palmer family as they cope with the loss of their one and only daughter, Alice. It's a strange film because at first glance it appears to be a documentary, yet even with this innocuous start, some moments just feel wrong. The first few shots still make me feel eerily frightened, and for most of them I don't quite know why. Except this one. By the end of the film, I know exactly why this one frightens me. A girl named Alice Palmer drowns in a lake. It's not actually the real-world Lake Mungo, which raises questions about why the film was called Lake Mungo to begin with, but those questions will be answered later. For now, after Alice drowns, her family reels. She seems to have been a wonderful person, and it feels unfair that she had to be taken from her family so soon. At first, the documentary just looks like a way to memorialize her, but very quickly, it becomes clear that something else is going on. As her brother Matthew explains, after her death, strange things started happening around the home. Matthew has caught several paranormal happenings on camera, and sure enough, anytime there appears to be an innocuous photograph of the backyard or of Norville Dam, a blurry female figure can be seen staring at the viewer from the background, but just subtly enough that you might not notice it until the frame begins to zoom in and you feel a small chill in your spine. The family can't hope to explain these events except for with theories. Is Alice still alive? Is this a collective hallucination formed by grief? They obviously start to entertain the idea that Alice has returned as a ghost, though each family member has different reaction to this idea. Alice's mother never saw her body, not wanting to remember her as a bloated corpse, but this let her imagination get the best of her. She started having dreams about the girl alive, and in a strange twist of fate, started to fear her own daughter. Alice's father didn't want to think about her death. He was the one to actually see her body and verify it as hers, but afterwards he tried to forget it through his work. He also fed this denial by initially keeping the house lights on, as if trying to beckon Alice home. The terrifying thing is that he might have succeeded. The last family member to mention is Matthew. I mentioned his pictures before, which caught that strange figure on camera, but when it comes to him as a person, it's a little more tricky to diagnose his particular form of grief. Like his father, he buries himself in his work. In this case, that means his photography and his music. He gets quieter than normal and isolates himself at times. Once he reveals his photographs to the rest of his family, a rift starts to grow between them. As his mother starts to really truly believe that Alice is alive, she starts to wonder if her husband made some sort of mistake when diagnosing the body of his daughter, but he finds such a truth incredibly difficult to believe. He thought he knew what he saw, but slowly his convictions start to waver as well. This all culminates in Alice's body being exhumed, just to remove any doubts about whether or not this truly was the person everyone thought it was. After it's revealed that it is, in fact, Alice's body, you would think the questions of her family would fizzle out and they would be able to finally start to move on, but that's not at all what happens. The doubts and fears continue, since if it wasn't Alice in those photographs, who was it? This all proves to be too much for Matthew, who, in an effort to stop this madness, reveals that he faked the photographs in an effort to get Alice's body exhumed, hoping that that would give his mother some closure after her alarming nightmares. He thought an exhumation would put her mind at ease, but now everything has become considerably worse. Matthew decides to come clean, and his parents are clearly incredibly disappointed in his actions, obviously, but despite that, their lives can continue now. They no longer have to feel haunted by Alice, and they no longer have to worry about the photographs. Matthew's actions, while dubious and deceitful, did in a way help with his family's grief and provide a bittersweet end to the movie that ensures I will never forget the haunting tale of Lake Mungo.
Hi, the film is not over yet. It's about halfway through at this point, and I refuse to elaborate further on the plot beyond this point because I really think you should check it out for yourself and see what happens in the second half of this film. All I'll say is that while the first half of the film portrays Alice through the lens of her family's grief as a perfect, sweet child, the second half of the film deconstructs this and shows us that Alice may not have been the person that we thought she was. And in a sense, that becomes more terrifying than any of those photographs ever were. We get a darker side to Alice's character, blurring the lines between truth and fiction, before shocking the audience with a truly horrific end that I don't think I'm ever going to forget. You'll have to watch this film for yourself to see what I mean, and I highly recommend you do, but trust me, the supernatural stuff isn't over either. Oh, far from it.
This film just creeps in on you, and some shots feel viscerally wrong in a way that few other films do. I don't want to give away too much here, since if there's one film in this video I think you should check out for yourself, it's this one. I also may make a longer video about this movie in the future, since there's so much more to talk about, but that remains to be seen. What I can say right now is that while Lake Mungo is sort of a slow burn, it's completely worth it by the end, and I promise I have not told you the whole story just yet. Every performance feels so natural, and within seconds, you forget you're watching a scripted story. You just get enveloped in the grief of this family, which makes the supernatural events significantly more terrifying when they do begin. And when I mention supernatural events, I'm not talking about Matthew's fake photographs. It's weird that the film is called Lake Mungo because Alice, as I mentioned before, does not drown in Lake Mungo. She drowned in a completely different place. My theory for why the film is called that has to do with the fact that the real Lake Mungo isn't an actual lake, not anymore. It used to be, but it's been dried up, and now only a dry imprint of its former self remains. I believe this is a direct parallel to Alice and the things that happened to her in this film, being a shell of her former self, just an image appearing in photographs and not the actual person her family remembers, but that's just my opinion. Regardless, this film mostly relies on a slow, creeping feeling of dread to scare the audience, apart from one scene. I won't spoil it, but that one scene will stick with you for a long time. I hope I'm not overhyping this film, but I genuinely think it's something really special. If you think you're prepared for it, I highly recommend giving it a shot.
Alright, we've talked about a lot of different, unique pieces of media in this video, and I hope that there's been at least one that's fascinated you and that you're interested in checking out for yourself. I think part of the reason that horror has been not given the credit it deserves is partially due to the oversaturated landscape where there's so much of it, and so much of it is garbage, and even more are just designed to be the most wide-reaching crowd pleasers possible, just designed to bring in audiences and sell tickets. I don't know, I feel like a lot of that misrepresents the entire rest of the genre, and a lot of people forget that there is more to horror, and that it can tell important stories that reveal things about our world and about ourselves as well. I hope that in this video I've successfully demonstrated that with each work that I've covered. Horror scares us in a controlled manner. You can always turn off the TV, you can always turn off the game console, you can always leave the theater, you can throw your VR headset against a wall. It leaves you in control even when you don't feel like you are, and it always puts things into perspective while emboldening us to face our fears. That's a really cool thing, and it's a big part of why I feel like we like horror to begin with. Alright, that's it. That's a wrap. I'll see you guys later. I'm gonna go have a sleepless night, many nightmares. That's about it. That's all. Bye-bye.
Oh, that was bad. Oh, you know, it's a miracle they gave me a driver's license to begin with. Anyway, thank you all for watching that video. I hope you liked it. I have plenty more stuff coming down the pipeline. If you want to see all of my future videos early, use the link on screen right now or become a channel member. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. For now, I'd like to thank the people who are patrons and channel members, and that includes right now Sketch Arts, Evan Agradano, Connor Stearman, Dogman83, and our new patron, Luna is the best, which I am sure is absolutely true. So, thanks to all of you guys for your continued support, thanks to everyone else for watching the videos. I'm gonna see you all very soon, but goodbye for now.